Let's skip the long, drawn-out intro. You likely just finished playing Little Nightmares 2 and you're wondering what the heck is going on. What are those glitchy shadows that we see throughout the game? What is up with the TVs and why can we travel through them? Why are there kids made of porcelain? I will attempt to answer all of these pertinent questions in a clear and concise manner. In order to do this, I will start with a piece of marketing material that was released by Bandai Namco back on February 4th. It features the English illusionist Darren Brown discussing the potential origins of dreams and nightmares. He evokes three theories, the first of which comes from the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who said that dreams and nightmares are nothing but outside stimuli playing out in the theater of our mind. The second theory he puts forward was one by the psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, who said that dreams and nightmares are manifestations of our subconscious. As for the third theory, Darren Brown does not give an author, but I have my suspicions as to who he is talking about. The third theory is that nightmares are the influence of a, quote, external malevolent force, one that is timeless. The goal of that force is to break through into our reality, and one way it tries to do this is by possessing the human mind. The example that Brown cites is when you wake up from a nightmare, hyperventilating and in a cold sweat. In this case, we feel as if we had just escaped possession by this malevolent force, but who knows what might happen if that nightmare were to fully possess us, and bend us to its will. Well, I think the Little Nightmares universe does a fairly good job of showing what such a reality might look like. In this reality, nightmares are not only possessing us, in some cases, to use Darren Brown's words, the nightmares have crossed into the physical world. But where do these nightmares come from? What is the nature of this source, and where is it located? I will give the short answer first, and then elaborate. Just as there is a conscious side and an unconscious side to the mind, the same is true for the physical world, at least in the Little Nightmares universe. That's the short answer. When we are unconscious and we experience nightmares, the reality our mind perceives becomes twisted, horrific, makes no logical sense. The world of Little Nightmares posits that the physical world can suffer the same fate, that mind and matter share an intrinsic link. If you are having a hard time understanding this, think of the Silent Hill series. In those games, reality breaks down from the normal world to the fog world to the nightmarish otherworld. Moreover, the monsters in those games are described as products of the unconscious mind. The same principle carries over to the Little Nightmares games. Now, in respect to the unconscious side, there is a concept in psychology, as well as religion, known as the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is a force, a mental and physical force, that all human beings are connected to. It exists outside of space and time. It is everywhere and nowhere. It is the source of all of our psychic functioning, our emotions, our instincts, and most importantly, our dreams and nightmares. It has no definitive form. In fact, it is shifting between many different forms all at once. If you have a hard time picturing this, try to envision what the internet looks like. It can't be done, because you cannot perceive all of the internet's web pages and images simultaneously, but that is what the collective unconscious is. It is an imperceptible, sometimes malevolent force that transcends human consciousness. The concept of the collective unconscious has been used many times in fiction, like in the aforementioned Silent Hill. Most recently, we saw it in the video game Control, where the concept is referenced by name. We see the world in that game construct and deconstruct, shift and twist, as if one were moving from consciousness into unconsciousness. However, the best place I've seen the collective unconscious concept used was in the video game Persona 4, a game series that I just recently started playing. In that game, the main characters venture into the collective unconscious to fight the malevolent forces that reside within. In order to access the collective unconscious in that game, the main characters use a television as a portal. If there was a bridge between the conscious and unconscious side of your mind, the television would serve as the bridge point in the physical world. Now, as for how this applies to Little Nightmares, I believe that the collective unconscious is akin to that malevolent external force that Darren Brown was explaining before, if not in its entirety, then at least in part. Allow me to cite the evidence in favor of my conclusion. Just as the collective unconscious has no definitive form and is always shifting and twisting, we see the unconscious world that Mono ventures into shifting and twisting. In order to reach the unconscious side, Mono uses the TVs, a la Persona. Not only that, he can use the TVs to travel through space and time, which is appropriate because Darren Brown refers to this force, this collective unconscious, as timeless. I imagine that at some point in the past, whichever corporation ran the broadcast tower in the game found some way to broadcast the contents of the collective unconscious through television, which would explain why all the humans we see are so irresistibly drawn to their TV sets. They can watch humanity's deepest and darkest desires acted out on screen. I also find it appropriate that towards the end of the game, we see parts of the unconscious world devolve into this organic matter filled with eyeballs. It reminds me of two things. On the one hand, it reminds me of the game Bloodborne. In that game, you can travel to another plane of existence known as the Nightmare of Menses. This plane of existence was dreamt up by a collection of people known as the School of Menses. Once again, nightmares being both mental and physical. In that nightmare, you could find a being known as the Brain of Menses, an entity that was lined with eyes. It is theorized that, like the nightmare, the Brain of Menses was born from the collective imaginations, or collective unconscious if you will, of the school. On the other hand, I'm reminded of the Japanese manga Berserk, a franchise that heavily inspired Bloodborne. In chapter 83 of the manga, the main character comes across a being known as the idea of evil. This being describes itself as having been created, like the Brain of Menses, from the collective unconscious of the human race. It, too, is covered with eyes. With all this said, I cannot help but think that Little Nightmares 2 is carrying on this same tradition. Maybe this organic brain matter in the game is a being dreamt up by the collective unconscious of humanity. Or maybe it's an attempt to illustrate the collective unconscious itself. I lean towards the latter, but I can't say for certain. Either way, I believe it is not only birthed from human minds, but, to use Darren Brown's words, it draws its strength from us. Moving on. One of the malevolent forces that exists inside the collective unconscious is known, in psychoanalysis, as the shadow. The shadow is seen as the dark side of a human being. When you try to hide or ignore all of your negative traits, you push them down into unconsciousness. Those traits then form your shadow. In the aforementioned Persona 4, when traveling through the collective unconscious, the characters encounter their own shadows in physical form. For the third or fourth time now, mind and matter are the same thing. As for Little Nightmares 2, I believe we see the same concept applied. As we see in the secret ending for the game, both Six and her glitchy, shadowy half exit the unconscious realm. They then, of course, look at the picture of the maw, indicating that Little Nightmares 2 was, in fact, a prequel. As we see in the first game, Shadow Six appears each time regular Six needs to feed her hunger. She goes from eating the bread, to eating the meat, to eating the rat, to eating the gnome. It is almost as if Six's shadow side is egging her on to give in to her darkest desires. This ultimately concludes with her feasting on the lady and then on the souls of the other patrons of the maw. At this point in the game, we see a sort of shadowy, cloudy substance surrounding Six, as if she has been completely possessed by her shadow self. All of this seems to echo what Brown originally said about the nature of nightmares. The forces that exist within the collective unconscious, of which only one is the shadow. In the case of Six's shadow, it, like other nightmares, crossed over into the physical world and was able to possess Six and bend her to its will. Now, as for the Porcelain Children, this is the one I struggle with the most, so please bear with me. I think they have some sort of link to the shadow concept, because when you kill them, you see a cloud of black smoke emerge from them, much like the cloud of black smoke you see emerge from the lady figurines in the first game. Maybe the shadows of children long past animate these porcelain kids, given their rampant bad behavior and violence. But that begs the question, what happened to the kids that these shadows belonged to? Maybe it has something to do with the cataclysmic, apocalyptic event that the world has clearly gone through. Why is it that so many times throughout the game, we see people's clothes strewn in such a way as if a human being just disappeared out of them? This reminds me of that one movie we all watched in Christian school, Left Behind. In that movie, the Christian apocalypse happened, and all the souls deemed worthy for heaven simply disappeared from the earth. All the unworthy were left behind. But that doesn't mean that the shadows of the worthy children simply disappeared. Maybe part of that apocalyptic event included the shadows, those evil forces crossing over into our world, possessing both animate and inanimate beings, and instilling their eternal, hellish reign. But that's just my opinion, I could be wrong. I'd honestly love to hear somebody come up with a better theory than this one. If you have it, make sure to leave it in the comment section below. If you liked my theory, please make sure to hit that like button. It's totally free and helps my channel out more than you guys know. Seriously. Also, special thanks to Eliza, as always, for the lovely thumbnail art and looking over the script of this video with me. If you want to see more explanation videos like this one, click on any of the videos you see on screen now. Until next time, just remember, as always, to stay yellow.